Hello and welcome to the session. Let's continue our discussion for another important file type called as JSON file. So JSON JavaScript object notation is also one of the very important type of file, and it is very widely used in software development. Basically, when we are uh, handling the API request, REST API request, or between two systems, so that time the data is exchanged in the JSON format. So let us see one example, basic structure, key value pair, and we will just see how it is different from the XML and what are the advantages. And it will have JSON object, JSON array, and we will see what is a JSON path concept and some other attributes. So let's get started. So I have this sample file. It can be of the extension is .json. It can be whatever. Now in JSON file structure, if you see, it is always between this two curly brackets, and we have something called as a key and value. Okay, so every JSON object is basically a key and value, key and its value. Now there's something called as JSON object and there's something called as JSON array. Now if you see here, this item object or item JSON key has one array. If you see array, so array is basically between this square brackets, and whatever is this, then this is the curly bracket, that is not an array, that is basically an object. Now let us see. So now if you see, I have just minimized it. So there are basically two objects, two JSON objects in this JSON array. The first is this one and the second is this one. So one of the main difference between JSON and XML is basically in JSON we have key value pair, that is JSON object and the value. In XML it is not like that. In XML we have node, we have element, we have attributes, and we have a additional overhead, like opening the node, opening the element and closing the element, like opening tag and closing tag. In JSON, there is nothing like this. So this is a bit simple as compared to XML file. Now, if you see here, this first item, so this is divided here between this and this. So it is basically one full JSON object. So JSON array will contain multiple JSON object. Now again in this JSON object, there are again key value pairs. So these individual items. And now if you see this one, this example, so now this JSON key ETA has this value, and value may also contain multiple JSON key value pair. So that is also allowed, that one value can contain multiple JSON objects. In this example, if you see, this payment key has one JSON object between two curly brackets, and then that JSON object internally will have is having a JSON array. Okay, so any combination is possible. Only thing is it should start with a key. Everything should start with a key. Okay, it is always mandatory that key has to be string only. Okay, so JSON array inside a JSON object or a key. Now these arrays are considered as separate individual items. Okay, and so on. So now this is one item and another item. So if you see, this first item is ID is shoes, and second item ID is photo frames and the corresponding details. Okay, so we have seen some basic structure, key value pair, and just a small comparison with XML. So JSON is typically, because of uh, low content, lower size as compared to XML, is bit faster. And also in XML we have a lot of other overheads, like XML parsing is bit time consuming. So JSON is something which is preferred nowadays for most of the projects, most of the API testings and all. So we have seen JSON object and JSON array, and what is a JSON path? So as compared to the XML path, this is also similar, that uh, so now this is inside one JSON object, and now this is the sub object. Inside that, this is a sub object, and inside that there is a key. So this can be a path of a JSON. This is also called as a JSON path. JSON path for a particular key and its value. Okay, so now we will see how to add, remove. So we'll play with this JSON, how to add, update, remove JSON array, JSON objects and all. We will do JSON diff between two different JSON, and the library what we are going to use is basically org JSON simple. We have other libraries like JSON, Jackson, and multiple other libraries who has some other benefits. right? So let's see one example. Now, one point to note here is JSON object are unordered. What is meant by unordered? Okay, so when you process a particular JSON, okay, when you process a particular JSON, now at the moment you see that the first element is this shoes and second element is photo frame. Or even if you see in this, first is token, customer ID and item. Now when this is processed and when other system will want to parse this or process this, it may not be in ordered way. So that means that the first can be the item, second can be token, and third can be customer ID. Inside an item, inside the first JSON object, the first can be a payment, second can be additional data, third like this, fourth, fifth, sixth. So the sequence is not maintained. That is the speciality of JSON, that it is unordered. The elements are unordered. Okay, they are in a proper hierarchical format, but if there's a these two are on the same path, then they will, or they may be at a their sequence may change. Okay, for example, as I was saying, so let's say this will come at a later part, this ID may come at this part, and so on. So this is how it happens when you process and parse JSON. So we need to be aware of it, right? So for processing this JSON, we have to use different libraries. So I have used this com Google code JSON simple library. Practically, if you Google also, there are many libraries which are supporting this JSON manipulation and all, but I have used this one because it is easy to understand. Now I have this Jackson core also for specific purpose, Jackson data bind, Jackson annotations, JSON path. It is basically to traverse between traverse and read or count the number of times this JSON path is repeated and so on. And then this is ASM's supporting library. JSON Smart is there, SL4J API, Z JSON path, commons collection. It is from Apache, so it is used for some manipulation purpose in future, and so on. So you can download these individual libraries, the latest versions and all, or I mean the version is maintained here, or in the Maven project, just import this dependencies section. Right. So now let us see one example. Now, yeah, so we have seen how it is represented and what is JSON object and JSON array. Now let us see one example for pretty print. So what I'm doing here is basically I am reading one file and I am doing a pretty print. Now what is difference between pretty print and normal print and how to pass it? So this is where you print non-pretty and this is where you print pretty. So let's just run it once and see what is happening. Right, so if you see, this is non-pretty print, which is basically a single line print, which is good in certain ways, but this, let's say your JSON is having many key and value pair and many JSON array, JSON objects and all. So parsing that visually and understanding it may be challenging. So that is why we have a pretty print where it will print in a tabular format and which is easy to understand. Okay, so pretty print we'll be using at multiple places. Okay, next example. We will see what is a JSON path. Okay, parse JSON as JSON path. So I have this file JSON. The content are almost the same thing what we have seen here. Item, it has multiple JSON objects. So parse JSON like XPath in XML or also called as JSON path. So we have seen in the XML file parsing how the traversing is done and how to calculate the number of times a particular JSON path is repeated. So that is what is this JSON path. This is done using there's a class called as JSON path, which is I think in one of the library. Yeah, it is in com.jv JSON path library. So this library also we have imported. So JSON path dot load the file name, and this is a special format wherein we have to specify. This is a little special way to find a JSON path. So what I'm doing here is basically I am I want to know the quantity, how much is the quantity where id equal to photo frame 2501. That is, get the value of key equal to quantity. Now what is this id equal to JSON frame? So if you see here in this JSON, there is this id here, id is shoes, and next JSON object is basically photo frame. So it is kind of a database query that I want to know uh, the quantity where id is photo frame. Okay, I want to know the quantity value where the id is photo frame. So that's what it is doing, get quantity where id equal to this one. Okay, so first get the individual item. So what we will do is json path dot load, and this is a special format using which you can raise as a database query, that dollar dot item question mark bracket at the rate id equal to id equal to this one, wherever you find this id, where um, where you want to get the quantity. Okay, so first you will get the entire photo frame id JSON. So you will get this full JSON, and out of this I just want to extract the quantity. So that can be done using JSON path read. This is the individual output, and I want to know dollar dot dot quantity. So how many times the quantities has come, and the value of the quantity that it will show. Okay, so value of the quantity where id equal to 2501. So this can be enhanced further. Uh, this JSON path dot read. So the format in which it is sent, this is a little tricky, and this will come with practice. So I've given one simple example. If you want, you can go through this other articles where it is explained in much better way. Okay, and how do you pass it? So you have this JSON array from net mini dev.json array class, this thing, the object of that. So that is how you will get it. Okay, so let's just run it and see. So I think for photo frame id, the quantity, what should be shown is quantity is one. Yeah, right. So the value of the quantity is one. Okay, now this second one is parsing get operation. Yeah, so this is another way, or the very traditional way to find the quantity from that particular JSON where ID equal to this thing. So in earlier example, I have directly used a ready-made library where I need to pass the particular uh, uh, query in a proprietary format or in a specific format, I would say. But here you can traverse, you can do parsing and all. So what you do, you take a JSON parser, and to that JSON parser you pass the your JSON content, then you get the object, and from that object you get the item. So you will get multiple items that is in the JSON array. So in that JSON array, you traverse in the JSON array, I mean in a for loop, and you get a particular object. You say object get ID, which contains this photo frame 2501. So as soon as it matches, then it will give you the quantity item. Okay, so let's just run it, and it will also print the value as one only. Okay, so if you see, this is the normal original file. Again, it's a non-pretty format, and yeah, so where the id quantity where id is this is one, and quantity where id is shoes is, and zone in India is two. Okay, so two examples are here. This is where quantity, I want quantity where photo frame id equal to photo frame, and second is where id equal to shoes and zone equal to India, I want to quantity. So id equal to shoes and zone equal to India. So id equal to shoes, id equal to shoes, and zone is India. Zone is India. So I want to know the quantity. So the quantity is 2. Okay, so that's what it is printing. Quantity is 2 here. Now in the second case, In the second case, it is a little extra piece of code. Why? Because here I am doing this zone comparison also. So zone JSON object is basically inside another JSON object. So that extra level of parsing has to be done. Okay, so here it is checking for the ID first, and then it is checking for the zone. If it contains India, then it is taking the quantity. Okay, so this is a simple case. Okay, in this example, let us see put operation. Okay, so we have done get operation, now put operation. So put operation is basically updating the JSON content. Okay, now set quantity to 2000 where ID is this one. So instead of get, we are doing a set value for a key equal to quantity. So same thing here, instead of get earlier, we are doing a put, and we are again doing a get, so that we want to confirm the value. The same thing for the next iteration, that whether when ID and quantity is this, okay, when ID is this and zone is this, then you set the quantity as 5000. So similar things are here. Now first it will check whether ID is this thing, then zone is this thing, and it will set the quantity and it will get the quantity. Now this is a little recursive also, that I want to go inside the available JSON array, JSON object, and then JSON array, and then inside that JSON array maybe a JSON object and all. So this is a little specific implementation, because I know a little format of the JSON file what I'm expecting, but of course it will be different for different business requirement. Okay, so same thing here, like you have a for loop that you loop in a JSON array. In that JSON array, you again find a JSON object, and in the JSON object you get the zone, and if it is India, then you put this thing, you set the value or put operation. Okay, let's just run it once. Right, so setting value of quantity 2000 and 5000. Okay, put operation. Then add another JSON to current JSON. Right, this can be also a good requirement. You want to add JSON from another source to your current source. So see what is happening here. So I have a JSON file name, and this is original file content, and yeah, another file name. So ultimately, after parsing and all, I want to use a JSON parser, then JSON object, and then JSON array, and I will get an item called as get a JSON array with item called as item. Okay, and here utility adding another JSON file content. So this is another JSON object. So what I'm doing, I'm JSON array original dot add JSON object other. So just you have to use the add method. So from where this JSON array is coming, it is coming from the first file to which you want to add something. Okay, and then using that object mapper, you are writing back into the file, or you're basically pretty printing. So let us see what is happening here. Right, so this is your original file, this is your another file, and this is your combined JSON here, and it is pretty printed. So you should have ID dummy 2501 and size S somewhere here. Yes, ID 2501. Yeah, this one, ID 2501 and size S. Okay, this was not there in earlier JSON. Okay, and if you see the random thing, so customer ID token should have been at the top, token and customer ID should have been on the top, but it has come little bit at the bottom. So that is fine. This is how the pretty print should work, and this is how the elements which are adding another JSON to my current JSON. Okay, you can have a look at this code when you have access, and you can do multiple different actions on it. Okay, remove JSON object, so kind of reverse operation. So if you see, I want to remove a particular JSON object, so I will say remove size, color, quantity, ETA, other items, and then I will just do an object mapper, and then I will write value to a string. Okay, nothing too fancy, so let's just run it and see the difference. Okay, so original file content, and after removing few JSON objects, so what all things are removed here? Size, color, quantity, ETA. Okay, so if you see, there is no size, color, quantity, ETA. Color is there. Yeah, so I think it is removed only for the first object. Yeah, it is removed only for the first JSON object. So for the first item, it is removed only for the first item, where it is, I think the ID is shoes 1001. Okay, now we have remove JSON array. Okay, so remove JSON array, basically removing a particular array itself. So what is happening here? So this is a JSON array, for example. I can remove the entire JSON array. So how do you remove that? Is basically you read the file, and then you remove whatever index of the JSON array. So what you do, you take a JSON parser to get it from a file into a JSON object. Then you make it as a JSON object. Then you check whether it is a JSON array item called as item. So there is an item here, right? So this is an item. So remove that item itself. Okay, so after removing JSON, so let us see, uh, yeah, what is happening here. Right, so now you have item, which is photo frame. So there were actually two items earlier, photo frame and shoes. So shoes is removed. The first one, it was removed. Okay, this is basically remove JSON array. Now you have JSON object compare. So uh, now if consider as a business requirement that there are two JSON objects, so you want to compare that. So you have to compare uh, each and every sub JSON array and sub JSON object. So if you see here, I have this JSON compare to JSON object and just tell if they are identical or not. So this is one JSON array. This is one JSON object. This is another JSON object. Sequence of adding element is changed on purpose. So if you see now, JSON object 1, JSON object 2. Now this is a basic JSON array that I will be adding as a skill and as a skill. But in this two JSON object, okay, if you see employee ID, employee name, employee ID, and the skills. So skills section, which is basically shuffled. So the sequence is bit shuffled here. Now when you compare, if both JSON objects are identical, then it will, so to compare this thing, you say JSON 1 tree 1, this one, you have to make a tree. So mapper is basically an object mapper class object. It is required to get uh, the the JSON string. If you see the JSON string in a tree format, and that will give you a JSON node. Okay, so now you compare the JSON node compare with JSON node 2. Okay, now there's a slight change here. So what I'll do in the JSON object 2, I will just make employee ID is little different. Okay, employee ID I will make as little different here. Okay, and now again, once again, I will compare. So let's just run it and see what is happening. Okay, so if both JSON array JSON objects are identical, yes. So if you see in the first comparison, it is saying it is true, but in the second comparison it is not identical. Why it is not identical? Yeah, why it is not identical? Because there is this slight change here. Okay, not this one, I think. Yeah, this one, there's a slight change between two JSON objects, so that is why it is not same. Okay, now we will compare the JSON array. We've done with the JSON object compare. Now we will do JSON array. Okay, so JSON array, I have two JSON array here, and now I will convert that to a mapper class uh, read tree. So basically a tree or a JSON node, and I'll compare it, and I will make a slight change here. So JSON tree 1, JSON tree 2, both will be equal here, but if you see, the sequence of adding element is changed on purpose. So I will add in the third one, I'm adding these three additional attributes, and now if I compare, it will say even elements are same, but the sequence is not same, so that is why it is not identical. So whenever JSON array is compared, the sequence of the elements matters. Okay, whenever the JSON array is compared, the sequence always matters. Right, so JSON array 1, JSON array 2 is identical. Here it is not identical because the sequence is different. Okay, now let us see JSON object diff. Okay, so this is basically will give you a diff to compare the JSON object and get the diff as in what is added, removed, moved, replaced, and copied. So we have this JSON path library from Flipkart incubator, which is very helpful. So what is happening here? There is a temporary JSON array. It is filled into JSON objects, and yeah, I'm reading the JSON object 1 and 2 using mapper.readTree as a JSON node, and in the diff I will just compare. I will pass on the two. Okay, so since so actual difference it will show me. Let's just run it and see what is the difference it is showing. So employee ID is different, employee name is different, location is different. Okay, so yeah, this is the actual difference it is showing. So yeah, this is operation is replaced. So this is the JSON path slash AMP location. So Berlin value is different, employee name is different, employee ID is different, and so on. So this is the JSON diff uh, functionality we want to check. JSON array diff. So again, it will be just a diff for different array, and JSON object types. Okay, so let us see what is JSON object type. So what is happening here? It is basically read JSON object whose value is string, boolean, integer, or float. So what we want to know is the type of the JSON object. Okay, so if is it a string or is it a integer or what? So those are all we will see. So we have something called as, there is a JSON object here, and you do a get, you pass on the string, you'll get the value. If you typecast it to string, and you print whether it is string or not, what is the value of it. Okay, so if you want to get the type, basically you have to typecast it. Okay, so it is boolean, char, float, and all. Yeah, so basically dot get key here, dot get method always returns a generic type, that is an object. So we need to typecast it. So that is why we normally do a typecasting for that particular value which we know already. Right, so it is giving you the correct value here. This is as intended. Okay, so after typecasting, whatever value is there, that it is printing. Okay, so this is JSON object types. Now, practically there are, so we have seen there are huge things what we can do with JSON. JSON compare, get, put, JSON path, occurrence, remove, update and all. Now there are there are large number of things which can be done with JSON. For example, we have a nested JSON. So basically a JSON inside a JSON. Okay, so we want to parse a nested JSON for most of the business requirement. So that can also be done. So apart from this org JSON simple library, apart from this library, we can also do parsing using JSON, JSON path and Jackson data bind. So here are some links from where you can download the required jar files and you can use it. So this is about JSON file format uh, as compared to XML also. So yeah, let's see the next file discussion, next type of file in the subsequent session. Thank you.